All right, everybody. I am so lucky to be here today with the coolest woman in the entire universe. This is
Oh my
Jennifer
gosh.
Smith, Dr. Jennifer Smith, my friends. And just to give you the preface, she lives in Manhattan, where I live, and she's a professor at Kansas State University. I've seen her around town lots of times. And gosh, a couple weeks ago, there was what would you call that? Just a grouping, a gathering.
Yeah, a
Just
discussion of like-minded individuals.
there we go. And it was all about the anxious generation and just the effects of technology, screens on kids.
Yeah.
And Jennifer just happened to be one of the panelists. And when she started talking, I was like, okay, we need to get her on a webinar as soon as possible because she's everything that we are. So I'm really excited to have her here today. She actually born and raised in Las Vegas. And so yeah. And she met her husband and they moved to Wisconsin, where she was a professor at the University of Wisconsin. They moved here roughly about 10 years ago, would you say?
About that.
10 years. And she has two daughters. So one of her daughters is a junior at Kansas State University. And she also has a daughter graduating from high school very, very soon, which is
Empty nesting. Here I go.
right.
Yeah.
So so what kind of brought this together is, we as in Casey, we've really talked about the effects of technology and just how that's changed play for kids.
Yeah.
And we often talk about the book that was written in 2005 by Richard Louv. He coined the term nature deficit disorder, which isn't a clinical official term, but basically he was noticing as more and more children were having more and more access to technology, less access to playtime, how childhood obesity was on the rise, all kinds of ADD, ADHD, all the anxiety, depression, all these things we don't want to see in our children, how there was this kind of correlation happening or a disconnect, as kids
Right.
were having lack of play and how play changed.
Right.
Like a lot of times as adults, we spend our time outdoors as kids and we had fun out there. And
Yeah.
how the statistics right now are saying that the average kid under the age of 13, outside of school, like outside of structured sports practice, outside of recess, the average kid in the US under the age of 13 is only spending 30 minutes outdoors a week for fun. Um, and it's interesting with my son, he's 12, and I'm like, go outside. And he told me, and it just broke my heart. He's like, Mom, there's no one there.
There's no one there.
I
He's
can't
right.
believe
There's no one there.
there's no one there. And he just said, this is how we connect. We connect and we talk, and this is how we play. So Jennifer, in all of her research, it's really interesting some of the statistics that she was sharing in her research. And it's, we're Casey, Kansas Association for Conservation and Environmental Education. We're coming at it through the lens of, you know, I guess how this impacts our kids, in this way. But we've often talked about we really need to be connecting with people who are in health, how there's so many cross sections. It's not just about, environmental education. It's not just about that piece. It's the health. I mean, it's addressing the whole person. And so that's what I thought was real cool with what Jennifer was doing, is it's what we're doing, it's what we're talking about, but she has just a different lens and kind of different statistics than we often share.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, what are some of your, I don't know, yeah, how did you get started, and how did your research kind of, yeah, how did you even find the research that you were going to go into?
Yeah, so I started to notice this change in the classroom with students. And I was asking one day, I was teaching a family relationships course, and we were talking about romantic relationships and how they started. And a girl in the back raised her hand and said she'd been online texting this man that she'd met from Chicago, and she lived in Green Bay, so it was about a 2-hour difference, and that they had been texting back and forth for 6 months and they had never seen each other. But they had decided it was a relationship, and that weekend she was going to meet him. And so that was really fascinating to me that they'd never even shared images. They just texted. That was all. They never even called each other. And that weekend came and went. And the next week she came back to class and I said, well, and she said, well, he didn't come. He was too nervous that I wouldn't like him. So we've decided that we're going to wait another month and then we're going to share pictures. And then the semester was over, so I have no idea how that relationship worked out. But the thing that really fascinated me at that moment was developing a romantic attachment to someone that you had never seen, that you had only shared words with. And there's so many aspects of that that are fascinating. So I really kind of started to dive into, there's this topic called solipsistic introjection, which is just a very complicated way to say that the words we see on a screen, we internalize in a voice. We decide the voice. And that was really interesting too, because that's part of imagination, but it's not actually based in any form of connection. So there was just a lot of this that kind of led to me thinking, how is this lending to this epidemic of loneliness, which has come out? In 2010, Dr. Holt Lundstad released a study where they had looked at global statistics. They had more than 300,000 people in this study where they looked at global statistics on the impact of loneliness and how loneliness was causing early mortality. And they were like, how is this possible? So they also were looking at then the connection between this rise in loneliness, this rise in technology. Additionally, there was a study looking at the rise in narcissism. And just to add to this, narcissism meaning a narcissistic trait, not a personality disorder. So narcissism is something we all have. If we were to take the test, we'd all score somewhere on that spectrum. But the numbers of people scoring higher on that assessment have been going up. They've been testing college kids, and it's impacted their affective community involvement and all of that. So all of these pieces are kind of going together with this rise in access to social media, the first iPhone being released in 2006. And we see this correlation and all of these things move together, along with what you were talking about before, the idea of outside time, right?
Mhm.
Statista just posted a statistic that suggests that about 60% of all 2 to 3-year-olds have access to their own iPad. So a designated iPad for a child at that age to be able to use at will. So we're seeing not just the missing aspects of being outside, vitamin D, which is, we know, absolutely essential to maintaining healthy mental health, but the lack of connection, face-to-face connection, which Dr. Castley Killam, who is another researcher, came out with some very interesting material in the last couple of years talking about the antidote to loneliness is face-to-face engagement, which is a no-brainer for most of us to understand. But the reason this is coming out as such an interesting kind of evolution is she's reframed it to what they call social health. The idea of we need 1 hour of face-to-face connection a day because, and just to get a little bit scientific, our rises in cortisol can really only be diminished by an increase in oxytocin. And oxytocin is something we can only get from face-to-face connection. You can't buy a pill to help increase oxytocin. It doesn't work. So we really need to have an increase in that to sort of bring down stressors that happen in our bodies. And when you sit in front of a screen for long periods of time and your body isn't moving, you're absorbing all of that anxiety, causing cortisol levels to go up, anxiety to go up, right? And then you're not getting any vitamin D, so you're not having anything to help balance any of the other chemistry. So we're just these kind of time bombs of extra chemistry, extra neurotransmitters that don't have a home and can't be balanced. So it's just this big elixir.
Hmm. One of the things you mentioned on when you were on the panel was the addiction rate. I think like you were talking about 36 minutes, 240 reels, but that makes people feel good, but it must not give them, like you said, the balance they need. So can you explain that and
Yeah.
I guess how that all ties into what you just said?
Yeah, so that what I was just previously talking about is just kind of basic chemistry. Once you add in the impact of social media, especially TikTok, because TikTok tends to be the most potent in this way, you're getting these dopamine hits, right? Very fast dopamine hits. So with about 240 reels in about 36 minutes, your brain is just firing. It's getting all of this like massive reward for these very fast-paced engagement and thinking. And but what happens over time, 36 minutes isn't enough to get that same level of dopamine. The next day it's an hour, then it's an hour and 10. And then we have some of these kids who show up in some of the studies that I'm doing with logging 8 hours a day of time on just TikTok to the point where they get through all the reels that have ever been released in that day. 8 to 10 hours. It's just an enormous amount of time. But what happens is the dopamine no longer hits the same way, and you need more and more and more of it, or you need more stimulation from more, how do I say this, more stimulating forms of videos,
Mhm.
right? So you may have gone from informational videos to, exercise videos, and now you find yourself watching videos that are far more titillating, for lack of a better word, to try to get that same amount of dopamine hit. And dopamine only can reset if you take some time away from the stimuli that caused that massive dopamine hit for several days, several weeks. Some are suggesting up to a month before you can go back and still get that same amount of satisfaction from the previous engagement. So there's a lot that's having an impact on our minds that didn't used to have that impact, you know?
Yeah, it was interesting talking about, one of the teachers, she was a high school teacher on the panel, and she talked about when phones were first released in her classroom, she could take the phone away, like, give me your phone, and she could take it. Versus now, I mean, just how connected, students were to their phones, and she can't take them anymore for risk of endangering herself because kids would become so aggressive.
Yeah, there's actually interesting research on the fact that the device itself, we create an attachment to, and that
Mm.
that attachment level is representative of the attachments that we feel for the people we love most when they measure those. And
Oh
so the
my.
device itself is actually symbolic of all of those relationships that they have developed, right? As if those relationships are completely dependent upon access to this. And that's very telling, right?
Yeah. Well, and also like how you were talking about the dopamine, it just has to become a stronger, that she was talking about how she used to be able to show like this old Western movie.
Yeah,
Kids loved it, and now she's showing 1923, which if you've ever seen 1923, it's like intense. And I mean, it's an adult content. And
right.
even that doesn't keep her kids' attention, in the classroom.
No, attention spans have definitely gone down. The need for constant entertainment is there. These kids are not able to sit through long format programming. So even 45-minute shows, like they have to have their device on their lap. Or a movie, if they're required to watch it, they have to have their device or something else to augment that stimulation because it's a slow burn. And some of the early science on that, when they started to see flipping from device to device to device, like back and forth. So if you're sitting there watching a film, you have your iPad on your counter or on your couch, and then you've got your phone next to you. You've now got three devices that are dividing your attention. And they're showing that this is building up very interesting plaques in the brain, which are reminiscent of dementia in some of these kids who are doing this for hours and hours and hours. So memory is being impaired, and potentially we don't know what this is going to look like long term. We just don't know.
Wow. The other thing, there was a therapist, like an early childhood therapist, on the panel. And, she mentioned that, in her, even the younger kids, like you were talking 2, 3, 4,
Yeah,
they used to show up and, her therapy is play therapy,
yeah,
and they would show up going, well, what are we going to do? She's like, whatever you want. Um,
yeah.
and they just didn't have it in them to have any creative play or imaginative play. They just needed it to be hand delivered on a plate.
Right. Yeah, they need a prompt in order to come up with some kind of creativity. We've become a society of parents who are not allowing our children to find boredom. And in boredom is where creativity is born. And we don't allow that. If a child says, I'm bored, well, we're immediately going to try to give them something to do, right? To help them. And this is impacting executive functioning early on in development. It's impacting imaginative play. It's impacting social play. So their ability to engage with other kids who are not like-minded. They become intolerant of behaviors that are not like their own. And I think that the biggest thing is that as we're watching our children select their own focus all day long. And when they get to select their own focus for attention, meaning that if they don't like what you're saying, or they don't like how you look, or they don't like what's going on, they immediately pull their attention out and put it back on their device because they get to choose where all of their attention goes.
Mhm.
And when you're not challenging that attention, you're not challenging their ability to think, the term is called theory of mind, which is the idea of being able to see through the eyes of another, taking the perspective of another person, being able to actually step out of your own perspective to consider somebody else. But when you have your device to allow you to only consider your own interests, we lose that capacity, which it makes sense that we're losing empathy. It makes sense that we're losing all of these sort of fundamental pieces of connection. And
Wow.
I'll just add one thing on the end of this, if you don't mind. I just taught a health psychology course this semester. And the final project was they had to do 2 straight months of a daily act of kindness, or 2 straight months of 1 hour of engagement with somebody significant a day. And they got to pick which one. And then they had to journal, and they had to do a pre-test and a post-test on happiness. And the pre-test numbers and the post-test numbers, there was an increase of about 2 points, which was the Oxford Happiness Scale, which is kind of significant. But the thing that was really telling is the culminating papers where students said, I didn't realize that just holding the door for somebody could make a difference to them. I didn't realize that just looking in the eyes of the person giving me my Starbucks drink and saying thank you could actually make somebody smile. And so it was a really interesting project to see how just the smallest effort can actually not only change the person you're engaging with, but change their perspective. And these students are like, I just feel better. Like I'm suddenly aware of people around me. And I'm like, oh, okay. It's the challenge, but the challenge had to be there and it had to be offered as a grade,
Mhm.
right? To get them to engage in this way. But it's just helping me realize how far we have fallen from
Mhm.
just regular face-to-face, let's be kind to each other.
Yeah.
They need to know what that means. What does it mean to be kind? Well,
Mhm.
I guess we have to teach you.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there's been a huge difference, like post COVID. We were so isolated and it was almost like bad to interact with people for so long
Yeah,
that it's like you have to be like, hi, and
yeah,
like,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. Um, we just did a professional develop like an in-service day for teachers, and it's so cool everything you're talking about because it was about the anxious generation, and we were talking about how nature helps, and
Mm.
a huge part of nature and getting outdoors. I actually just was talking to a person yesterday, and he was just saying how frustrated he was with his son's teacher this year. As a fifth grade teacher, and his son just had the worst year of his life. It was a student teacher,
I,
and every day, like almost every day, she would take away their recess.
oh,
And that's like the one thing, like getting kids outdoors. That's like,
oh,
and so just how nature helps. I mean, it increases compassion, empathy, cooperation, fosters kindness, resets focus. I mean, even just
Right,
20 minutes is all it takes in nature
right.
to reset that. So it's just, yeah, I mean, so I just want to add in a couple of other things that I thought were interesting from some recent studies. Was that there's this idea of micronature, and that's where if you don't have access to, let's say, getting out in the woods, or
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be anything huge or dramatic, but micronature is even where you just have one thing that you can observe over time. So it
Right.
could be a flower outside your window.
Yeah.
It could be birds. Like we have a hummingbird feeder, and our hummingbirds, they like really do come back like every year.
Yeah.
So it's just like, wow, you flew thousands of miles to be with me, and
Right,
there's
right.
just joy, even if it's small, but micronature helps. But this was a study I hadn't seen before, and it was for teachers, or really any of us, but it was how even decorating your room with plants or green, like how much that helps like calm, focus, and so just thinking about how you design your
Yeah,
spaces around you and how that
yeah,
makes an impact.
absolutely.
So to wrap this up, and I would let you talk as long as you want. So this is not to shut you down
Uh-huh.
at all. You just add whatever you want. But I really loved, so anything else you would like to add, feel free. But I really love the power of what you said about the void. It's not what we're doing, it's what we're not doing.
Yeah,
So I was wondering if you could touch on that and just kind of
sure.
take us home with wherever you want
Yeah. So the studies that are coming out are related to technology. One of the things that there's a rather large meta-analysis was released this year, looking at all the studies connecting this mental health crisis to social media and to technology. And the one thing that came out of all of it is that they are looking at the time we're spending, but not what we're doing. And so we can't necessarily yet say that social media causes, right? We can't say actually that any of this causes. We can just say there's this correlation. And what this is really representing is the fact that there are 24 hours in a day. And if you're spending 9 of them on a device, what are you not doing? And so we need to really address the fact that it's just more of an imbalanced life that we need to be more concerned about. And that in the absence of face-to-face connection, we're also not developing relationships. And relationships are what help us survive. And whether it's a relationship with nature and we're outside watering our garden or taking care of our tree or mowing our lawn or the things that it takes to actually continue to live on this planet in the nature aspect. But more importantly, these relationships and being able to identify the importance of connection and standing there talking to somebody and hugging them. I mean, yes, we've come out of COVID where we couldn't touch for a long time and technology supplemented, but it is a mean taskmaster because what it takes is much bigger than what it offers. And we need to use it as a tool and not have it use us as a tool. And when we lose our time and lose our connection, we allow it to use us as a tool.
to.
And one thing I will give a shout out to parents who are trying to figure out in this madness, what do we do? Is a lot of grace for recognizing, number one. And number two, become a partner with your child. You can't remove the device, society won't let you. But becoming a partner in understanding how to know what they're doing and be part of it and engage in opportunities saying, hey, we're going to have a no phone night. We're going to have a no phone walk today. We're going to try to re-engage them in society and then stand strong. Not,
Mhm.
sorry, this is a no phone night. You have to put your phone away. This is what we're doing tonight. And it's going to be met with resistance because the face-to-face is not as much of a quick hit as the engagement does. But slowly they will start to understand that there is a balance there.
Mhm. Yeah, I really loved at the panel, someone just kind of mentioned letting kids know, like, this isn't your fault. You know,
Right,
this was done to you. And
right.
and I was like, that's such a positive message because, a lot of times as parents, we just are so frustrated
Yeah,
at them. But I think, like you just coming with compassion, and I
yeah.
just thought that was really powerful.
It's really important that we do that. Our kids can't be to blame. They can't be to blame. And it's a social conversation too that is also very difficult to take offline. And in my TikTok study that I'm doing right now with students having to give up TikTok to be a part of the study, their biggest concern is I'm missing the social dialogue that comes from these memes, that come from these videos that connect us, that keep us in conversation. And the students who've done it have said the first week was just painful, physically painful. And they felt like outsiders. They felt like they didn't know what was going on. They had stomach aches. They couldn't sleep. And then by week two, they're like, okay, so now how do I fill my time? And then they started to become more active, more proactive, more engaged socially. And by week three, they were feeling better. And many of them said they would never go back. So, but it's hard. It's very hard. It's like dieting, right? It's like if you're deciding to cut out, those M&Ms that you eat every afternoon, that bag M&Ms to see if you can lose a few pounds, you're still craving it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You want those M&Ms. So we
Right.
have to be kind and patient.
Mhm. And also, I like what you said the other day, how they found that 60 to 80% of the information on TikTok.
Oh, yes.
It, can you touch on that? That was just,
Yes. Yes. So several different disciplines have gone in and looked at the information offered on TikTok. They've done it from a business perspective, politically, they've done it, and it's been done from a health perspective. And all of those studies show that between 60 and 74% of the information being shared with these TikTok videos is inaccurate. It's either one shred of truth than being housed in something else. Often, a lot of it is just people deciding that this is something that works, and so they're sharing it with everybody, and then everybody tries it. And then probably one of the biggest findings was the misinformation about mental health. I teach a class called Abnormal Psychology, where we talk about the actual mental health issues. And when you look at the TikTok information shared, everybody's going to land somewhere on the OCD spectrum. Everybody's going to land somewhere on the perspective of dealing with, we have depressive states or feeling anxious about things. But actual diagnosed behaviors are very specific to certain criteria and can only be diagnosed by people who have training and people who are trained in the tests and assessment that determine these things. But I have a friend here in the community who is a psychological test. She does psychological testing. That's what her business is. And she says that the increase in people coming in saying, okay, I need a diagnosis for ADHD. And because I know I have it, or I need a diagnosis for, and she'll tell them right off the bat, well, I'm going to give you the tests and assessments. And then whatever they tell me will be the actual diagnosis. I'm not going to give you that diagnosis. And when she comes out for a kid who says, I know I have ADHD, and the diagnosis does not reveal that, then they give her poor performance on Yelp, or they'll give her a poor evaluation
wow.
because she will not, you know, decide for them. She lets the actual testing that has been found reliable and valid to make that determination. And so it's problematic. Okay, you're not on the video, buddy. Although I can show him off. He's very cute.
Well,
My
sure.
buddy. Hi. Yeah, hi.
Of a post cat video for when he wants to stay on. I'm all for that.
Well, I guess he's telling me I'm done. So
Yeah,
I've talked a lot.
that was really good.
Okay.
Well, here's the book. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. It doesn't look very good. I'm trying to, but it's called The Anxious Generation,
Yep.
by Jonathan. Do you know how Haidt?
Yep. It's Jonathan Haidt. Mhm.
Haidt. So that's what we were discussing today. And
Yeah.
Jenna, thank you for your time. That was so great. Yeah,
Thank you.
wait
And
to
thank you again for inviting me.
absolutely.